The Tale of Gaara, the Desert Guardian. In a vast desert where the golden sands stretched endlessly, there lived a boy named Gaara. Gaara was different from everyone else in his village. He had bright red hair, piercing teal eyes, and the power to control sand. No matter where he went, the sand followed him, swirling around like it was protecting him. But Gaara's power wasn't always a gift. It made people in his village afraid of him. You see, Gaara had a giant gourd on his back, filled with magical sand. This sand would move on its own, shielding Gaara from danger. But the villagers didn't understand his power, so they avoided him. Gaara grew up lonely, always watching the other kids play, but never joining them. Deep down, all he wanted was to be loved and accepted. Gaara often walked alone through the desert, far away from the village. He would sit on the dunes, watching the sun rise and set. The sand, his only companion, would shift and dance around him, forming shapes in the air. Sometimes it would make animals like birds or camels, and Gaara would smile. "At least you're always with me," he said to the sand. But the loneliness was hard to bear. One day, while Gaara was sitting alone near the edge of the village, a group of bullies approached him. "Hey, monster, why don't you just leave? We don't want you here," one of them shouted. Gaara's heart ached, but he didn't reply. Instead, the sand around him began to swirl, sensing his sadness. The bullies got scared and ran away, but Gaara didn't feel better. He didn't want to hurt anyone, he just wanted a friend. One evening, Gaara saw a little girl crying by the village well. Her bucket had fallen in, and she couldn't reach it. Gaara hesitated for a moment, but then stepped forward. "I can help," he said softly. The girl looked at him with wide, nervous eyes. Gaara extended his hand, and the sand from his gourd flowed out, snaking into the well. It wrapped around the bucket and gently pulled it up. The girl gasped in amazement. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time, Gaara felt a glimmer of hope. Word spread about Gaara's kind act, but the villagers were still wary of him. They couldn't forget the fear his powers caused. Gaara tried to help more people, but their fear kept them distant. "Why don't they see that I'm not a monster?" he wondered, sitting alone in the desert once again. Years passed, and Gaara became stronger. He trained with his sand powers, learning to control them better. His sand could form shields, weapons, or even walls to protect others. He practiced every day, hoping that one day the villagers would see him as more than just a boy with strange powers. One day, disaster struck the village. A terrible storm swept through the desert, bringing fierce winds and clouds of sand that darkened the sky. The villagers were terrified as the storm threatened to destroy their homes. The wind howled, and the sand stung their skin. "What can we do?" they cried. Gaara stepped forward, his gourd on his back. "I'll protect you," he said calmly. The villagers stared at him in disbelief. Could the boy they had feared be their savior? As the storm roared, Gaara raised his hands. The sand from his gourd erupted into the air, forming a massive shield around the village. The wind and sand battered against the barrier, but Gaara stood firm. His teal eyes glowed with determination as he focused all his energy on keeping the shield strong. The villagers watched in awe, their fear slowly turning into admiration. When the storm finally ended, the village was safe. Gaara lowered his hands and the sand returned to his gourd. He was exhausted, but he felt a warmth in his heart as the villagers approached him. "Thank you, Gaara," one of the elders said. "You saved us." For the first time, Gaara saw smiles instead of fear. The children who once avoided him now ran up to him, their eyes filled with wonder. "That was amazing," they said. Gaara smiled, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known before. From that day on, the villagers respected Gaara and trusted him to protect them. He became known as the Desert Guardian, a hero who used his powers to keep the village safe. Gaara still spent time alone, walking through the dunes and watching the sun set. But now he wasn't lonely. He had found his purpose and the acceptance he had always longed for. As the years went by, Gaara's legend grew. People from faraway lands came to hear the story of the boy who turned his pain into strength, the outcast who became a hero. And though the desert winds continued to blow, carrying whispers of his name across the sands, Gaara knew he had finally found peace. Gaara's tale is a reminder that even when others don't understand us, we can still choose kindness and strength. And sometimes the very things that make us different are the things that make us great. Want more anime awesomeness? Subscribe and join our community.